my dreams is to become a successful singer and guitarist and performers music around the world.
Every so often a talent show throws up a name that everyone suddenly claims to have known all along, when in truth, almost nobody had heard a week earlier. That is what happened on July 7th, 2026, when a soft-spoken 16-year-old from Thailand stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage, picked up an electric guitar, and left four famously hard-to-impress judges on their feet. Her name is Nene Royal, and while the internet is busy calling her an overnight discovery, the truth is that she spent years building the skill set that made this moment possible. This is the fuller story behind that audition, where she came from, what she had already done before the cameras found her, and why the song she chose to sing carries far more weight than most of the people cheering for her that night ever realized. Picture the scene. The lights of the Pasadena Civic Auditorium, a room that seats around 3,000 people, the biggest crowd this teenager had ever stood in front of. She walked out looking exactly like what she was, a nervous, giggly kid, not the image most people have in their heads when they think rock star. She told the judges her name, said she was from Phuket, Thailand, and mentioned that she had picked up a guitar for the first time at around 7 years old. Then came the detail that turned the whole room warm. This performance was happening the day before her 16th birthday. It's the kind of small, human moment that reality television usually can't manufacture, and the studio audience responded the way you'd hope, breaking into a chorus of happy birthday before she had even played a single note. Her father stood quietly near the side of the stage, having made the trip with her from Thailand, watching the way a parent watches when they know exactly how much work has gone into a moment like this, even if the audience doesn't. Then she started playing. The song was Zombie, the Cranberries' 1994 rock anthem, and what came out of this shy teenager was not a polished, radio-safe cover. It was loud. It was raw. She growled through the chorus, dug into two-handed tapping on the fretboard, and by the midpoint of the song, she had the entire room singing along with her, as if she had done this 1,000 times before, which, as it turns out, she basically had, just not in front of people who were paying attention. Sofia Vergara told her flatly that the performance was spectacular and that she had a real shot at going far in the competition. Howie Mandel didn't hedge either. Call her a rock star, plain and simple. Mel B, who has a personal fondness for Phuket, praised her vocal control and said the pairing of her voice with her guitar work felt like a perfect match. Even Simon Cowell, who built an entire career on being difficult to win over, said her voice sounded genuinely authentic and that the rough edges in her performance were part of what made it work. For yes, unanimous, and she was through to the next round. For most viewers watching at home, that was the whole story. A shy kid, a surprising voice, a golden television moment. But if you rewind the tape a little further, you find out this surprise had actually been building for close to a decade. Nene Royal is a stage name. Off camera, in Phuket, she's known as Radhikarn Umloy, and to the people who love her, family, friends, the regulars of the market where she used to play, she goes by Prue. That detail matters because it captures something important about her story. There were two versions of this performer running in parallel for years, one known only to her hometown and one that the rest of the world only just met. She picked up her first guitar somewhere around the age of 6 or 7, depending on which interview you read, and from there she basically taught herself. No formal lessons, no conservatory, no famous mentor pulling strings behind the scenes. She learned the way a lot of self-taught musicians do now, watching videos online, copying finger positions frame by frame, replaying the same 4 bars over and over until her hands finally cooperated. That kind of practice doesn't look impressive from the outside. It's not the stuff of highlight reels. It's a kid alone in a room, making the same mistake 50 times until it stops being a mistake. What that self-taught foundation eventually produced was a musician capable of tackling material that trips up plenty of formally trained guitarists. She has taken on brutal, technically demanding rock tracks that require real command of the instrument, not just enthusiasm. That range, from delicate melodic playing to full-throttle riffing, is part of why the instrument brand Enya Music brought her on as a featured artist while she was still in school, a kind of endorsement plenty of adult musicians spend their whole careers chasing without ever landing. Long before Pasadena, there was the Naka Weekend Market in Phuket Town. This is the part of her story that almost none of the international AGT audience ever saw, and it's the part that reframes everything else. On weekend evenings, Nene set up with her guitar case open on the pavement, her amp running off a borrowed extension cord, and she played. Not for a studio audience primed to cheer, but for tourists shuffling past food stalls, more interested in grilled skewers and cheap souvenirs than in a teenager belting out rock covers. She performed there with local acts, including bands known around the island as Ozone Band and Mini Heart, playing rock and metal covers to crowds who mostly weren't listening at all. There's a very particular kind of resilience that gets built in a setting like that. When you're playing to people who didn't come to hear you, who are actively trying to get somewhere else, you learn fast that you can't rely on a crowd's attention. You have to earn every second of it, or you get none of it. That is a completely different skill from performing for an audience that already showed up expecting to be entertained. It's why, when she finally did step onto a stage full of people who were paying attention, for judges included, none of that seemed to rattle her once the music started. She had already spent years working rooms that owed her nothing. That market grind wasn't some tragic footnote either. It was clearly formative, and it's part of why local fans in Phuket had already built a considerable following around her well before AGT scouts ever got involved. One of the laziest narratives that spreads whenever a young performer goes viral is the idea that they came from absolutely nowhere, discovered purely by luck on a single night. It makes for a tidy headline, but it's rarely accurate, and it certainly isn't accurate here. Back in October 2023, Nene placed as first runner-up at the Overdrive Guitar Contest, a competition respected enough in Thailand's music scene to carry its own nickname among fans. Some call it the Guitar Battle. That's not a small achievement for a young teenager going up against a field of more experienced players. Then, in September 2025, she was recognized as an outstanding player at the King Power Band competition, another notable stamp of approval from people who evaluate live musicianship for a living, not casual internet virality. She had also already appeared on Thai television, sharing a stage on the WorkPoint 23 program Super 10, alongside veteran rock musician Poo Anchali, the kind of pairing that doesn't happen for someone who hasn't already proven she belongs in a room with professionals. And away from competitions and television, her online following had been climbing steadily, eventually surpassing 3 million people across her combined platforms, built largely on viral covers of songs by artists like Nirvana and System of a Down, long before Zombie ever entered the picture. Put together, none of this describes a lucky amateur who wandered onto a stage and got lucky. It describes a working teenage musician who had already been tested, judged, and recognized by people in her own country, arriving in the United States with a resume most adult performers would be proud of. Here's the part of the story that gives the whole performance a different weight once you understand it. Zombie isn't just a grungy 90s rock song that happens to have a good hook. It's one of the more serious protest songs to come out of that era. It was written by Dolores O'Riordan of the Irish band The Cranberries and released in 1994, and it wasn't written to be catchy. It was written out of grief. In March 1993, bombs planted in the English town of Warrington killed 2 young boys, 3-year-old Jonathan Ball and 12-year-old Tim Perry, and injured dozens of others. O'Riordan, touring at the time, was deeply shaken by the news, and the anger and heartbreak she felt became the backbone of the song. She was explicit that the violence carried out in the name of Irish nationalism did not represent her or people like her, and the song became something much bigger than a chart hit. It became a direct, personal rejection of using bloodshed as a means to a political end. Set that history next to the image of a smiling 16-year-old, one day away from her birthday, tearing through that same song on a glittering entertainment stage in California, and it becomes something else entirely. Most of the people cheering in that room almost certainly didn't know the specific tragedy behind the lyrics they were singing along to. Whether or not Nene fully carried that history in mind while she performed, there's something worth noting about a teenager from one side of the world channeling a decades-old cry against violence written by another teenager-turned-young woman on the opposite side of the globe. The song has always had a habit of finding new voices to carry it forward, and for one night, it found hers. It's also worth remembering that this song has never really faded. After O'Riordan's unexpected death in 2018, many assumed Zombie would settle into being a beloved deep cut, remembered fondly but rarely revisited. Instead, it kept growing, becoming something close to a stadium anthem, particularly among Irish rugby crowds, and eventually crossing well over 1 billion combined streams and views, a milestone that very few rock songs from any era ever reach. A rock cover version years later reintroduced the song to a younger generation of listeners who'd never heard the original, keeping the conversation around and alive in a very different cultural moment. So when Nene picked up that particular song for her audition, she wasn't just choosing something with a big chorus and an easy sing-along hook. She was, whether she framed it this way or not, stepping into a lineage of performers who have kept this specific piece of musical history alive for more than 3 decades. It's worth pausing on the actual mechanics of what she did on that stage, because the technical side of it is easy to gloss over in favor of the feel-good narrative. She played on a Fender Deluxe reverb amp through an Ibanez electric guitar, and rather than sticking close to the original arrangement, she leaned the song into heavier territory, more aggressive vocal delivery, a rougher guitar tone, and a passage of two-handed tapping that isn't a beginner's trick. Tapping requires real independence between your hands and a level of fretboard familiarity that usually comes from a lot of repetition, which lines up with everything we know about how she actually learned to play. Not through shortcuts, but through sheer time spent with the instrument. That's part of why the judges' reactions felt less like polite encouragement and more like genuine surprise. A soft-spoken teenager who structures her sentences like she's still building confidence in English, suddenly demonstrating that level of instrumental control, creates a jolt for an audience, because the two things don't usually arrive in the same person at the same time. But if you'd spent a Saturday night at the Naka Market watching her play for indifferent tourists, none of it would have surprised you at all. There's a broader idea sitting underneath this whole story, and it's one a lot of people can relate to even outside the context of reality television. You spend years working on something in relative obscurity, a skill, a craft, a body of work, and almost nobody notices. Then one moment happens in public, and suddenly people talk about you as though you were invented on the spot. It can be a strange, even frustrating experience for the person living it, because the overnight version of the story erases everything that actually made the moment possible. Nene's audition captures that gap about as clearly as it gets. The girl the judges met was trembling and unsure of her own English, joking about her nerves, sounding genuinely uncertain about whether her dream of becoming a touring musician would ever happen. The girl who then picked up the guitar had already logged hundreds of nights performing for indifferent crowds, had already placed in a nationally respected guitar competition, had already been recognized by an instrument brand, had already shared a stage with a professional Thai rock musician. Those weren't two different people. They were the same teenager, and only one version of her ever made it onto American television before that night. The audition was never meant to be the finish line, and by every indication, she isn't treating it as one. Those 4 yeses only advanced her to the next stage of the competition. How far she ultimately goes in season 21 is still an open question at the time of this video. What is clear is that she isn't sitting back waiting for internet attention to decide the rest of her career for her. Away from the AGT cameras, she's continued writing and recording original material, with a debut EP reportedly in the works. A meaningful next step for any young artist who has built a career so far mostly on cover songs, however impressive those covers have been. Moving from playing other people's music to putting out her own original songs is a different kind of test, and it's the one that will really determine whether this becomes a lasting career rather than a viral moment. She has also continued performing back home, keeping her regular slot at the Naka Weekend Market in Phuket for as long as her schedule allows, which says something about where she still sees her roots even as international attention builds around her. When you line the whole thing up, a kid who taught herself guitar from online videos starting around age 6 or 7, who spent years playing to indifferent night market crowds, who collected competition placements and a rock brand endorsement that most people outside Thailand never heard about, and who then chose one of rock music's most serious protest songs to introduce herself to an American audience. It stops looking like a lucky viral clip and starts looking like the visible tip of a much longer story. The trembling girl who joked about her nerves and the confident performer who tore into zombie were never two separate people. They were the same teenager the whole time, and the version of her that most of the world just discovered had actually been working toward this exact moment for close to a decade. If you had told the kid busking over the sound of passing motorbikes at a Phuket night market that 4 internationally recognized judges would one day stand and applaud for her, she might not have believed it. That's exactly why it's worth paying attention to wherever her story goes from here. Because based on everything that came before this one audition, this almost certainly isn't the loudest moment she has left in her. So here's the actual question. Do you think Nene Royal has what it takes to go all the way in this competition, or is her biggest moment still ahead of her? Let me know what you think in the comments.